keep paying attention to attendees to see who else we need to bring in. We are live.
Excellent. Thank you, Brett. All right, good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the city website at www.milwaukieoregon.gov. You may locate them by navigating to the community calendar where tonight's meeting page is posted. If you've not reviewed the agenda, please do. It contains important information about our process. First, we start off with informational items. Do staff have any informational items they'd like to cover?
I would just like to introduce you to our senior planner, Brett Kelver. He has been promoted after many years at the city, so I'd like to offer him congratulations. He's been here many times, so congratulations. Well deserved, Brett.
Thank you.
Brett, we were just waiting till your hair got to a certain length.
That's right.
I think we got there. For Laura, we got there, I think.
Oh, congratulations. Yes, very well deserved. That's awesome. Fantastic news. Okay, back to it. Nothing else, Laura? All right. Well, that was certainly enough. Okay, audience participation. This is an important opportunity. I guess maybe first I'll ask Brett if you recognize, are there audience members of which to participate?
Yeah, let me.
3 attendees, 12 attendees.
So I'm seeing Gary Klein with his hand raised, and Gary, we want to make sure that this is, if you have something you want to speak to that doesn't relate to the hearing on the agenda tonight, because we're not at the public testimony piece yet. Okay, he's put his hand down, so.
You know what, I'll go through this short description, and if anybody raises their hand, then that'll be their opportunity. So this is an opportunity to comment on items, as Brett said, that are not on tonight's agenda. Does anybody wish to comment on an item that is not on the agenda? If so, please take a moment to use the raise your hand feature in Zoom and indicate that you wish to make a comment at this time. We'll also check with any audience members who have called into the Zoom meeting by phone. Just before you testify, please remember, state your name and spell it out for our record. And please also state your city of residence. So in that time frame, Brett, did anybody?
I'm not seeing any hands raised here.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, I'm going to move on then. So we're going to get directly into the heart of the matter tonight, which is our public hearing. The public hearing on Coho Point redevelopment is called to order. The purpose of the hearing is to consider the application number DR-2021-001. The purpose of the application is to request approval for the various applications associated with the proposed 6-story mixed-use building at 11103 Southeast Main Street. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee's zoning subdivision ordinance, comprehensive plan, any applicable municipal code provisions, and the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I now ask staff to cite the zoning ordinance section where the criteria can be found.
Okay, give me just a moment here. Okay, the applicable criteria from the Milwaukie Municipal Code, Chapter 12.16, Access Management, Title 18, Flood Hazard Regulations, Section 19.304, Downtown Zones, including the Downtown Mixed Use Zone or DMU Zone, Section 19.401, Willamette Greenway Zone, Section 19.402, Natural Resources, Section 19.508, Downtown Site and Building Design Standards, Section 19.510, Green Building Standards, Chapter 19.600, Off-Street Parking and Loading, Chapter 19.700, Public Facility Improvements, Section 19.905, Conditional Uses, Section 19.907, Downtown Design Review, Section 19.911, variances, including subsection 19.911.6, building height variance in the DMU zone, section 19.1006, type 3 review, and section 19.1011, design review meetings.
All right, thank you, Brett. All testimony and evidence must be directed towards the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criterion or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the City Council based on the issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow a response precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party with standing may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons with standing are those who submit written comments or testify in person via Zoom. If you are here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria, and to avoid repetition and non-relevant information. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the Commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless the continuance or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. First, we start with conflicts of interest. With a few questions to the Planning Commission. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from this hearing? Please raise your hand. Seeing none raised. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report on an ex parte contact? Raise your hand. Seeing none. If applicable, which we have no applicable ex parte, so we'll move on. Will any commissioner who has visited the site prior to the hearing please physically raise your hand? That would be all of us present anyway. Did any of those commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or know anything different than what is indicated in the staff report for this application? Just raise your hand for me. Okay, no hands raised. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of a member of the Planning Commission? And Brett, let me know if so, use the raise your hand feature in Zoom now to indicate.
I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Great, we'll move on. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? Again, use the raise your hand feature in Zoom.
I'm not seeing any hands raised.
All right, let's move on then. Staff presentation. Go ahead, Brett.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome. Thank you, Chair Losfelt. Commissioners, good evening. I'm Brett Kelver, Senior Planner with the City of Milwaukee, and I will be walking you through this application this evening, Master File DR-2021-001. First, just a quick background on this project. It has been a long time coming. The city had an opportunity to acquire this site back in 2006 and recognized that although it has its challenges and constraints, that it is in a really important location in the south part of downtown as a gateway kind of property. And so with that in mind, the city has been working since that time, doing its due diligence. And finally in 2017, it was ready to push ahead and start searching for a partner to develop the site. The city had several goals for development on this site, and those are reflected in the development agreement that the city has made with the applicant, Coho Point LLC. Some of those things the city was looking for was it wanted to develop a 5-story building on the site. It wanted it to be a mixed-use building that provided housing as well as retail at the ground level. I was looking for some component of affordable housing within there, and the target it set was 10%. It wanted to make some kind of a connection on the Adams and Main Street portion of the site to the Plaza Street or the Festival Street that's already been established in Main Street, and also to make a better connection to Dogwood Park. And then it also wanted to take advantage of an opportunity to make a pedestrian connection through the site between Main Street and McLaughlin Boulevard. And those things were captured in the development agreement. And what we have before you for consideration is building on that agreement. So the proposed structure would be actually 6 stories, and we're going to talk about some of the reasons for that and some of the adjustments needed. It is providing 195 units of multifamily housing with approximately 7,000 square feet of commercial space on the ground floor, focused on the Main Street side of the building. There is structured parking in the lowest level of the building, 81 spaces. You'll see from this rendering that although it is a 6-story building, in some sections of the building, it actually staggers and drops in height as it gets closer to Kellogg Creek and the Willamette River and McLaughlin Boulevard. There are, floodplain and natural resource impacts that we'll talk about later. Those are some of the challenges of the site. But we are getting with this project a proposal to improve the plaza at Adams Street to make that pedestrian connection between Main Street and McLaughlin Boulevard, and along the way get some needed restoration along the stream edge in Dogwood Park. It's a complex site. It's a complex application package. There are a number of applications that are part of this for the downtown design review piece. The western half of the site is covered with the Willamette Greenway overlay. So there's Willamette Greenway review. As we've noted before, it's adjacent to Kellogg Creek. And so there's water quality resource and habitat conservation area that's designated on the site. So we've got natural resource review. There's a request for a building height variance, as well as variances for off-site mitigation for natural resource impacts, and also kind of a technical type of variance because the building isn't meeting 100% the 0-foot setback requirement for the ground level. A key part of the proposal is the request to modify the required amount of parking. So there's a parking quantity modification. And then, as with most projects of this size, there is a required transportation facilities review. So a lot of pieces to this one. Real quickly, I'm going to try to walk you through some of those, the approval criteria for especially some of the key parts of the application. They'll be here for your reference as part of your discussion. If you want to come back and have them displayed on the screen as you get into deliberations, we can do that. But starting with the parking quantity modification, the key elements of approval criteria here are looking for reasonableness of the proposal, and the proposed reduction, looking at factors like the proximity of transit, whether there's a transportation demand management program in place, or other things about users of the site that would help warrant the request, considering whether there would be adverse effects to on-street parking, and then in general considering whether this is really the least amount of change that can be made. So let's talk a little bit more about the parking, starting with what the basic requirements are for this project. It is 195 units in the downtown mixed-use zone. There's a note that in the downtown mixed-use zone, for non-residential uses such as commercial, retail, restaurant, there is no off-street parking requirement. So the focus of the parking request here is on the multifamily units. And there are some by right reductions to parking because of being in the downtown mixed use zone. There's an outright 25% reduction that can be taken for the parking. And if you have extra bike parking, that's another way to get up to 10% more. This project is asking for almost all of that, of the 30% max that you can have. There's a limit of 30% reduction for these things. They are proposing with the modification request, what they have to make their case for is to reduce the required parking by 58 more spots. So their proposal is for 81 spaces for this project. And so a key question here is, how is this going to work? So the two components that make that staff believes make this proposal work are the applicant's proposal to have a transportation demand management program. That is taking an active role in them making their proposed parking work. A key way that they're proposing to do that is by actively marketing this building as a site for car-free living. So obviously there's room for some parking, but an important part of this is going to be the applicant advertising this as a place to live if you don't need a car. So making it very clear and upfront to people, almost just like if you were buying a property that was too small to park your RV, that's probably not the property for you. So for a lot of people who will be candidates for living in this building, the idea will be they're folks who can get by without needing a car. And how they're doing that is providing a variety of incentives, whether it's an option to have the rent reduced for not having a vehicle, or maybe taking a TriMet pass to be able to use light rail, providing and promoting opportunities for ride share. So whether it's facilitating loading and drop-off areas for services like Uber or Lyft, or getting people connected with some of the car share programs that are out there. Another key part of this is the applicant actually monitoring and tracking how the parking facility is being used. So having a registry of license plates for everyone who's been assigned a spot in there. That is information that can be used with the city's parking enforcement folks to kind of track and monitor who related to this building is using on-street parking. So this is a really important part of what makes this parking reduction proposal work in the eyes of staff. The other important part is the city's role, providing tension from the other side, and that is the downtown parking management strategy that the city adopted in 2018. This was the result of several years of work and study, meetings with stakeholders, business owners, and operators downtown, talking about what was needed to make the on-street parking that the city is responsible for managing work. And some of the key elements that came out of that strategy were recognizing that it was important with development opportunities like this one to take advantage and try to get some shared parking. So what the city's looking for in part is places for employees of downtown businesses and customers of downtown businesses to be able to use on-street parking to park, and recognizing that some of the places that there are to park right now, there are some off-street lots. Those are also sites for future development. And so as those begin to be converted over time away from parking, there's an obvious need to try to make some of that back up, and looking at chances like this to try to share parking is part of that. Another key part of it is what the city's been doing for a long time, which is we have time-limited parking spaces identified on the street, and we have staff who monitor that, who ticket people and patrol. Being responsive to changes downtown as new sites like this one develop, and seeing how the needs change for businesses and customers down there is an important part, and recognizing the city has the power to make adjustments and respond to new needs. For example, as we hope like the downtown area becomes more vibrant, maybe there are more nighttime activities, maybe the time restrictions on parking start to extend farther into the evening, but and we devote resources to enforce that. But while it's part of the city's program here to make it very clear that projects like this one, where there are new residential units, those new residents are not entitled to any guaranteed use of on-street spaces. That's why the city is enforcing, writing tickets, but recognizing at the same time that we can respond as needs change, and that, for example, if spaces are free on the street overnight, if a resident can work with that and use that space overnight and then take their car away on their way to work or something over the course of the day, that is a way to kind of take advantage of and use those parking spaces in an efficient way. At the same time, for I think the last 10 years, the city has had an adopted residential permit program in place so that if impacts to some of our downtown residential areas, 27th Avenue, 28th, 29th, start to become impacted by projects, there's an opportunity for establishing a residential permit program so that again, some of the impacts of projects like this can be mitigated a little bit. So I'd say that staff's assessment of this is that by applying pressure from two directions: one, the applicant's active transportation demand management, and two, the city's active enforcement of and management of the downtown on-street parking are what we believe will make the parking work. And we can certainly discuss that more as needed. Moving on to the natural resource piece, the simple criteria for approving natural resource disturbance is, the ones that I think you're familiar with. The first effort is to try to avoid it where possible. The second is to try to minimize disturbance when it can't be avoided. And the third is to consider how any disturbance is being mitigated. This diagram is showing the dark red and the yellow. Let me see if I can get out here. There we go. I think I've got my cursor. So the red is areas of permanent impacts to the water quality resource area. This is obviously where part of the building is proposed to go. And then the kind of yellowish area is permanent impacts to the habitat conservation area. So just beyond the water quality resource area. This is where, there would be some improvements to the plaza area. And just to be clear as well, here's the boundary of the site. Sorry, I'm not having great cursor control. The area between, so the southern boundary of the site to here, this is the Adams Street right-of-way. It's undeveloped right-of-way. The city is obviously not planning to put kind of an actual street in here, but we are taking advantage of having that right-of-way to build this plaza and use it as a starting point for the pedestrian connection. And then farther to the south, we have the boundary of Dogwood Park. And so some of the impacts that are happening here, there's the permanent ones that I pointed out, and then there's some temporary ones. For example, along the bank where there's going to be some excavation to account for the fill in the floodplain area. These are areas that can be restored. And that's what we can see in the mitigation plan here is, again, the dark red is representing areas of permanent impact. But as we get, come down closer to the bank, these are areas that there are 4 distinct planting areas that will be replanted, revegetated. Some of them, there's a thin strip along the project's, within the project boundary itself with the site boundary, and then in the Adams Street right-of-way, and then continuing into Dogwood Park. There are several areas that are going to be revegetated and that are helping the city achieve something that it wants with Dogwood Park and in advance of the hoped eventual removal of the dam at Kellogg Creek. The request for a building height variance, it has its own special subsection in the 19.911 part of the code. And part of what's involved is making sure that the proposal is consistent with basically the downtown design review part of it, which in this case is part of the project's review. And then looking at things like quality of the project, the quality of construction, how it impacts views to the river, and then overall the kind of considering some of the public benefits that come out of allowing the variance. And you can see the illustration here on the right-hand side of the slide is showing what the kind of the original hope of the city was in those goals that I told you about for the site, was looking for a 5-story building. And so that very top image is showing basically that. The developers came to the Design and Landmarks Committee in March of 2019 to run the design concept by that group and get some feedback. And one of the points of suggestion was to try to be a little more sensitive with the design to the presence of the creek there. And instead of having such a kind of a solid block to kind of maybe cut away or step the building back a little bit from the creek. And that is essentially what the applicant has proposed, to basically take, in this case, kind of the western portion of the 5th story and flip it up to the Main Street side, adding a little bit more to that kind of urban feel on Main Street and opening the building up and pulling it away a little bit from the creek. And that is part of the consideration that the DLC made as they reviewed this project, and they came to a point where they felt that it was recommendable for approval, considering the way that the building kind of steps down as it gets closer to the creek and how it's kind of providing a little bit more of a break to the natural area there, preserving some views along key corridors and even opening up views from within the building for it. They talk about minimizing the shadowing effect on the creek, and then point out that that the design kind of allows some space for some of the things that are going to be public benefits, like the walkway, like revitalization of the downtown with that kind of more urban front on Main Street. So those are some of the high points from the DLC's review and their consideration of this. Overall, just to kind of run through these final few pieces of the other application aspects, the approval criteria for design review are really focused on the design standards that are in section 19.508. In this case, there are plenty of those standards, the specific standards that the project doesn't exactly meet. And in that case, the discretion is there, and that's what the DLC was considering, to look at is the design meeting the intent, stated intent or purpose of each of those design standards, and how is it relating to the relevant design guidelines? In this case, the DLC's review of this and their recommendation was that the design did meet all of the intent statements and met very well the applicable guidelines for this. So the DLC forwarded you their recommendation for approval. They were very satisfied with the design, and I think especially seeing the feedback that the applicant took from their earlier meeting with the group. The Willamette Greenway piece is a type of conditional use. Again, it applies technically to the western half of the site, and the criteria that are involved here are looking at things like, is the land committed to an urban use? How does the project fit with the character of the river? How does it deal with views, especially along, from public places, along public view corridors? How is it impacting access to the river? How's it dealing with the natural environment? And then there's quite a bit of discussion in the findings. The newly updated comprehensive plan has actually a lot of points that the building relates well to in terms of some of the goals for urban development, for natural resource protection, for the Willamette Greenway itself. And so those are discussed in the findings. And again, part of staff's consideration here was that the project did meet all of these applicable approval criteria. The two other variances besides the building height variance are, again, for offsite mitigation for the natural resource impacts, and also for that kind of technical issue of the building. And I'm showing it here in this diagram, not quite coming all the way to the zero setback point for the fringe of the building. On that point, staff found that the applicant's arguments about using some of those small recesses to provide some articulation and to kind of activate that pedestrian frontage, all were part of what are some of the important criteria here, providing a reasonable and appropriate response. There's some discussion of again, the public benefits, about minimizing impacts if there are any here. And staff's assessment for both the building setback and the offsite mitigation points of the variances were that the project did meet these respective criteria. So overall, to wrap up and allow you some time for questions, staff's recommendations are for approval of the overall package. So all those 6 different applications that are part of it, and we presented you with some recommended findings and conditions of approval. The only adjustments are ones that I notified you about earlier today, and I have a slide here. One is a new condition that would essentially capture and try to fix a little bit more the transportation demand management program. It is a very key part of what we feel is makes the project approvable, and so with this recommended condition, we're just trying to outline kind of some of the next steps and clarify the expectations. For example, that the transportation demand management, or TDM program, is something that will live with the building. It's not just something that goes with the applicant. And so if the applicant sells the project, that goes away. It's something that's understood to be kind of an operational part of the building, and that staff will work with the applicant to identify some performance benchmarks and set up some kind of a reasonable schedule for monitoring, so that there can be a way to, especially early in the life of the project, make sure that the parking management is functioning the way that it should be. And there's some related language in the findings that's on the next slide that would kind of help support that condition. I also wanted to clarify that we'd like to just make sure that we tweak condition 1A. That's the general condition that kind of references the latest version of the plans. And most of the plans were updated August 25th. We did get a revised natural resource report, including some clear mitigation planting areas. And we just want to make sure we tweak the findings to reference those specifically for September 21st. The findings change that we would need to make related to that TDM condition are pointed out here. And again, we can come back to this slide if needed as part of your discussion about making a motion if we get to that point tonight. So with that, I think I just leave you with kind of the standard decision-making options. Again, we presented recommended findings and condition of approval with, some of these small changes that we've just noted right now. As per your discussion, if you want to make additional changes to those, we will certainly try to capture those. There is time to continue the hearing if needed. Obviously, it'd be great to get to a point if you feel like it for a decision tonight. But part of especially the building height variance for downtown, I think kind of requires that the applicant extend the timeline for decision making, understand that there are a lot of moving parts there, so we don't have a strict time pressure there. But we're hopeful that we can get through a lot of the discussion tonight and maybe get to a decision point. And finally, if we have recommended approval, if the commission feels that denial is more appropriate, we'll just want to make sure that we capture some direction for adjusting the findings in that case. So with that, I guess I'll ask if there are any questions right now from the commissioners about anything I've presented. I see Commissioner Hamer with your hand up. Lauren, are you seeing that? Are you seeing his hand up? Okay.
Can you go back to the water quality resource, the one with the 100-year flood map on it?
Is it this one?
Go up to the previous one, I think. Okay, so I'm looking at that blue line, right, where that 100-year flood lies. And it goes all the way up to Main Street. Does that mean that we should expect the water heights to be the same throughout that boundary? Do you understand what I mean by that?
Well, not exactly, but let me ask you a question to follow up. Do you mean because of where the regulatory floodplain boundary is shown on this map, are you wondering whether that's supposed to mean that right now in a flood event that you would see water?
That goes all the way up to Main Street.
Yeah, it doesn't quite go to Main Street. I think if I'm looking at it, I think it kind of traces along here. There's quite an elevation change right here going up all the way back up to Main Street. So I think the floodplain area is kind of contained just a little below. But yeah, I think as I understand it right now, this is what's mapped as what could be expected to be flooded in a typical kind of 1% annual chance flood event. And I've got Beth from our engineering team here if she wants to weigh in and explain anything as we go into this.
So I want to make sure that, so at least the bottom 3 stories on the lower half are in the floodplain. Am I understand, or at least the bottom 2?
Well, yeah, I guess to clarify, part of what's involved with this project and why there is kind of as much disturbance of the natural resource area as there is because the applicant is proposing to add fill material to the site to kind of basically fill within that floodplain area to bring the building up out of it so that in fact the building wouldn't be in the floodplain. So it's a proposal kind of to change the flood boundary on the site. And what you have to do when you propose something like that, you're adding fill material in a place where floodwater is expected to go. And if you don't do something to compensate for that, you're going to create flooding problems for other properties. So you have to do what's called balance that fill with some additional excavation or cut. And that's part of what's being proposed. See if I can control my cursor here. Kind of this area. This is an area that would be excavated so that the overall flood storage capacity in this part of the creek would be maintained, if not slightly increased. There'd be a little bit more flood storage capacity because that's the trade-off you have to make if you're going to put fill in the floodplain. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And so is that what we are calling is Dogwood Park and that cut, is that the off-site mitigation?
Yes. Yeah, it's both. Obviously, because of all the development that's trying to happen on the site, there's not a lot of room to balance that fill with additional cut on the site. But this is one of those things that comes back to one of the opportunities of this, since it is a public-private partnership, and since the city is in control of both the Adams Street right-of-way and Dogwood Park, it allows the opportunity to consider, making some of that balance happen off the site in the right-of-way and in Dogwood Park.
Okay. Thank you.
And I see two more hands. Let me just say one more thing that I forgot earlier. That is also that if there are questions about the parking strategy, we do have Rick Williams, a consultant who's been working with the city for the better part of a decade on that. So we can certainly pull him in to answer those questions if needed.
Okay, I see hands raised by Commissioner Sherman.
Thanks, Chair Losfeld. Brett, kind of following up on Commissioner Hemer's floodplain question, we're just kind of wondering, do we have a sense of kind of how much kind of freeboard there is above the expected 1% flood before you actually get into kind of occupied building space?
I'm going to ask if Beth might happen to know something about that.
This is Beth Bertel speaking. The first story of the building is parking. So it is limited access, and it will be all the electrical and mechanical will be located at the flood protection elevation. The first habitable space of the building will be located up at the grade level of Main Street. So there's a full story between the base flood elevation and the habitable space of the building.
Thanks, Beth. Brett, just a...
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Another kind of parking related question. I didn't see anything in there, and it might also be complicated by the potential flooding factors, but anything around electric vehicle charging in the parking lot?
That I don't know that degree of detail. That might be a good question to ask the applicant team about what their plans are for kind of facilitating electric vehicle use and recharging.
Okay. And then one last question for you. I was just curious if the city's on-call natural resource consultant, ESA, looked at any potential impacts from hardening or kind of armoring kind of along the edge of the creek, and whether or not that would have an impact on the WQR or the HCA or any other kind of environmental impacts that you're aware of.
ESA was asked to consider the proposed mitigation and that balancing of cut and the wall in general. I think my read on their response was that they considered it to be generally okay. I don't know how much detail they delved into aspects of armoring. As I recall, I'm not sure their memo was that detailed in response, but I'd have to look at it again to see. I think their overall conclusions were that there were there were some limitations, I guess, in terms of improvements to the overall resource just because of the nature of the project, but that there, in most areas, there was at least no negative impact. And in a couple of cases, there would be some actual improvements in some of the ecological function. Or so for certain ecological functions, things would kind of remain unchanged or unimproved, but for several others, there would be some improvements.
Okay, Commissioner Kostrobody, your hand is raised.
Thank you, Chair Losfeld. Thank you, staff, for that presentation as well. I have a question on this map that we're looking at here. So essentially, the project is narrowing the creek, correct?
I don't think that's not quite, I think, how I'd understand it. I think, let me see if I can point out here. So you can see here is the pedestrian pathway that's going to be kind of along more or less the top of the retaining wall that's then kind of dropping down here. I don't think there's an overall narrowing of this just because of the existing elevation. There's actually a little bit of widening, I suppose, because of the excavation as we get down into the right of way and into Dogwood Park. But yeah, my impression is that the project is not kind of filling and coming in to further restrict the overall channel. They're just using most of the property by kind of building it up. So they're certainly changing the nature or the feel of it. I mean, there's already some steep slope there, but it's going to be obviously a little more, as Commissioner Sherman mentioned, kind of armored or a little bit more fortified there. But I don't know that it's fair to say that it's being constricted.
Okay.
I understand
Thank you. Other question. My other question is the mitigation. So there really isn't, based on what this is saying, there isn't any opportunity for offsite mitigation for this, right? Other than what they proposed of the planting of those additional trees, and is that going to be is that going to in turn, like how much more of a positive net positive is that going to be for that area compared to what we're losing?
Right. Well, to be fair, yes. So there is, because of what's being proposed, there is very little room for on-site mitigation of the natural resource impacts. And you can see here again, So everything that's shown in, up to the edge of the red here, this is the existing water quality resource boundary. And so someone proposing a different development to get into any disturbance of the natural resource area would, just try to stay back from this and not intrude on it. Or if they come into it a little bit, they would have some more room to do some mitigation, right? In this case, most of the resource area on the site is being permanently impacted, leaving very little on the site for mitigation. So there's a small strip maybe at the bottom of the wall that can be replanted. And so, yes, that's part of the reason for the proposed offsite mitigation for the natural resource impacts, is because there's, so little room left with this proposal to mitigate on site. In this case, which isn't often the case for a lot of projects, there happens to be kind of contiguous to this area, availability of space to do that mitigation, both because of who owns it or who manages it, in this case, the city, controlling both the right of way and the park. And, being able to be in a position to kind of shore up, I guess, some of the contiguous connected stream bank there.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hemer?
So I'll ask my easy question first, Brett. And so I'm looking at our report 4.1, page 2, which is the tax lot map, the Google zoom down. I don't know if you have that one on your slide. I'm just trying to understand how much of Dogwood Park, or can you kind of just show on your cursor there? I mean, is it the green that is getting cut away and the brown, which is technically Dogwood Park? Is that all staying? Could you just kind of? Let me just illustrate a little bit on this view, and then I'll move back to one of the natural resource slides. So, these are the different tax lots that make up the overall subject property in yellow. And then this is the Adam Street right of way. And then this is kind of the northern part of Dogwood Park. And so, the proposed building is occupying most of the site. There's a little bit of room for some mitigation plantings here. And then now let me go to the other view. So this is what's being disturbed. So we're in the Adam Street right of way. There's a lot of that cut or excavation is happening kind of in that space, and then into the northern part of Dogwood Park, kind of, down to here is where this new retaining wall will be. And then kind of showing what will be replanted. So, this yellow area in the bottom, below the wall in the Adams Street right of way, the green strip here, and then now we're into Dogwood Park. So here's the wall, and above the wall, the reason this isn't kind of shown as being mitigation area is because it's going to kind of return to being that kind of
lawn-ish park that it is right now. You know, I think it's intended to be kind of a place for a picnic table or that kind of thing. So it's going to be replanted, but it's a kind of on top of the wall, and those other parts of the park down kind of below the wall and going farther down into the park, these are other areas that will be planted. Is that getting at what you're asking?
Yeah, so we're losing a little bit of what people would call the lawn of Dogwood Park. Even though that technically it's not part of Dogwood Park, it's a street, right?
Oh, yeah. I guess if the portion that's in the Adams Street right-of-way now that kind of effectively serves as maybe a de facto part of Dogwood Park is going to be, I guess, converted more into like this kind of more hardscape plaza area.
Okay.
And the applicant team may be able to explain a little bit more about all of that kind of and how the landscaping and whatnot is going to work.
All right. So now my hard question is, how does this affect the removal of Kellogg Dam? Did we do any studies or anything like that about what this building and what this scape does and what the mitigation does to affect, the future plan of removing the dam, or does it make it impossible to be able to move that dam because of that structure being there?
Yeah, I'll ask others to weigh in if they feel like they have a better answer. I think a simple way to answer it is that nothing about this project, as I understand it, will prevent the city from achieving what it would like to achieve with the dam, and that is to remove the dam. I think another way to approach it would be to ask the question is, how will what is being done here in terms of mitigation, replanting, how will that be affected by removal of the dam is another way to look at it. When the dam is removed, as I understand it, the water level comes down a little bit. And so it will expose more areas kind of below what's there right now that will need to be restored and replanted. So one way to look at this is to say it's a little bit of kind of getting a head start on some of the revegetation and restoration that we're going to want to do when the dam comes out. But I don't think anything that's being proposed here is going to make it harder to remove the dam or is putting anything in the way of removing the dam, because the way that function will happen is the dam will go and everything will the water level will drop.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Edge.
Hi, Brett. Could you help? And I think this may help with some of the detail that we were asking questions about a few minutes ago. Could you show us where the creek flows through the dam and then also where the fish ladder is?
I'm not sure I have a great photo of that, but I think the best way to look at it is here. So here, here's where the subject property ends, and this is where the water goes under 99E. So basically it's a bridge. And then I think the dam is, I don't know exactly where it is, if it's under this part of the highway or more under our new bridge there. And maybe one of the engineers can say a little bit more about that. But the dam and fish ladder are kind of in this area, I think, or at least partially under McLaughlin. Any engineers want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, Brett, you're correct.
Who is that?
This is Jennifer Garbely.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yes, the fish ladder is basically, you can see it from the new bridge looking back, and the dam is literally right under that edge where you're pointing.
So the dam is under the new new bridge?
No, the dam is under the old bridge.
Okay.
The fish ladder is under part of the new bridge.
Okay.
Okay.
Could you just show where that is on the other map?
Where that comes into the view. I think it's cut off here. I mean, I think, for example, this is basically where the highway. So this is where the bridge of 99E is. So I don't really have an image showing. Those things are a little farther over here, I think. So McLaughlin is here.
But on the McLaughlin, on the east side, where the creek flows under, you can at least point where that kind of in that angle, that sharp angle right there.
Yeah, I think so. This is where the right, the creek is turning and going under the bridge. I think this is kind of this is essentially the edge of the bridge, the eastern edge of the bridge.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Sherman, coming back to you.
Thanks, Chair. Brett, kind of following up on Commissioner Hemer's previous question about kind of dam removal on the compensatory kind of cut and fill. I know that it's in as proposed, it's kind of on sites immediately adjacent to this site. Was there any discussion about other locations that might yield better ecological function elsewhere in the watershed?
Well, good question. I think, and I may ask Beth to step in and back me up here a little bit. Let me take a shot first. I think in terms of the compensatory cut fill balance, I think an important principle at play is, staying as close as you can, or, within this system, because, any material coming in or going out, would seem to have an impact kind of spatially very close by. So, for example, if we were placing a bunch of fill on the subject property and then coming, I don't know, 1,000 feet or 1,000 yards farther upstream and then doing our cut and fill, I don't know, Beth, I'm sure there's some analysis that could be done to see if that was preferable to staying closer. I don't know. I'm out of my depth a little bit there. Beth, what could you say about that?
Sure. Hi, this is Beth Bertel. I can jump in. Because Kellogg Creek is a lake right now, it doesn't particularly matter where the cut and fill are taken, because it's considered an ineffective area. It's a lake. If this was a creek, particularly what Brett was saying about taking the cut and fill at a similar location would be of far greater importance. So the location of the cut right next to where the fill is being proposed sets us up well for when this becomes Kellogg Creek again. But when this does become Kellogg Creek, there will be a lot of permits that are required, including some remapping of the floodplain. So there is quite a bit of work, and this permit can only take into account the current floodplain boundaries and not any sort of future revisions to those floodplain boundaries based on the removal of Kellogg Dam.
Beth, this is Lauren. Can I just ask you to go another step deeper on 2 points that you've just made? First of all, I want to know, when you say that it's different when we consider this a stream in terms of cut fill, can you just expand a bit more on why? And then can you also expand on why, as a creek, you would be remapping the flood lines?
So for the first question, a creek has a slope to it, and a lake, because of the dam, is considered just sort of all the same ineffective area. It all has the same control. It has backwater control from the dam. So the water level in the lake is being controlled by the dam. And when the dam goes away, that control goes away. And so suddenly your elevation of the creek, even though it might be quite gradual, or your slope change in the creek, does actually have an impact. And then I believe your second question, I apologize, was related to why would we have to remap the floodplain with the dam removal?
Yes, correct.
Right. Let's see. I'm not sure I can give you the specific FEMA requirements, except that when you remove a dam, you're doing in-water work, so you are incurring a variety of permits, and that type of work within the floodway, so which is considered like where the creek is, work in a floodway requires FEMA permits and usually requires updating floodplain boundaries. You have to address how that dam removal is going to change where water goes. So it would be similar if I'm a shipping company and I want to build some sort of huge wharf or something like that in the floodplain, or particularly in the floodway where the creek would be. I would have to show FEMA how that impacts where the water will go differently because of that structure. So if I'm adding or deleting a structure, I have to communicate and get permits from FEMA.
So Beth, is it fair to say that this would be a different conversation if the dam had already been removed and we were proposing to build on area of the stream?
I think it might be a different conversation in the sense that just if the dam had been removed previously, we might be working with altered floodplain boundaries. And so our area of mitigation would be impacted potentially by that change.
Okay, and the last hand that I see raised is Laura. Laura, are you intentionally raising your hand, or? I'm not quite sure why Laura has her hand raised. Brett, I see no further questions from the commission.
Okay.
I think we could probably move on. I've lost my script, of course. There it is. So at this point, Brett, question, have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items which have been included in the package for the meeting?
Yes, we have. Not as much as I thought, but we have. Since the meeting packet was finalized last Tuesday, we have gotten a few comments. We got a comment from Siri Bernard, a comment from the North Clackamas School District, basically saying that they'd reviewed the application, didn't have any comments. And then today we've received comments from the Historic Milwaukie Neighborhood District Association, from the North Clackamas Watershed Council, and from Gary Klein, kind of a follow-up or expansion on part of the Historic Milwaukie NDA's comments. Those are the comments that were received as of the start of the meeting today. And those have been shared with the commissioners via email.
Okay, so at this point, we're going to then move into the applicant testimony.
Yeah, so give me just a moment I need to promote a bunch of people into a different status here.
Okay. I'm assuming the first question, would the applicant like to comment, would be then yes. And so I'll just go through a few procedural things here. First, to the commission, are there any clarifying questions that the commission would like to make of the applicant before we move into public testimony?
I think that's a follow-up to the applicant presentation.
Yes, although it doesn't say that.
Yeah, sorry. I think that's after the applicant's spoken. If you have follow-up questions for them, that's the intent of that. So I think I have most of the applicant team in the panelist position. So whoever wants to start, just introduce yourself, maybe say your name, your address, and go forth.
Well, I guess I'll go ahead and get started here. My name is Fareed Balori. I'm the developer on this project. As my address is 12250 South Bremen Avenue, Portland, Oregon 97219. As some of you are aware, I am the dentist who's currently practicing in the corner of Main Street and Washington, and that little tiny building that you saw in the renderings is mine. And I've been in the city of Milwaukee since the mid 1990s. We got, I have windows that's overlooking the river and overlooking the piece of property that the city owns right now. And for years, I've been dreaming about something being done in this piece of land. So we got involved in 2017, as Brett said in his presentation. By the way, congratulations on your promotion. And from the get-go, we knew this is going to be a very complex and difficult development. There are numerous challenges involved in this project, and Brett pointed those out very nicely, so I'm not going to bore you with that. But we are bordered by McLaughlin, that's under ODOT jurisdiction, and then we have sides on Washington, Maine, and the creek that's under the city of Milwaukee. It's challenging. There's a 20-some foot drop from Main Street to McLaughlin. So if I need to go back to that, because I know a couple of the commissioners were wondering about where the floodplains are currently and where they're going to be at the later time, but my team can also explain that. I don't want to take too much of your time. I just want to say that we are really excited. We've been working with the city of Milwaukee for almost 5 years, believe it or not, since 2017. It doesn't seem that long, but it's been. And we are excited about this project. We are looking at it as a gateway to the city, as something that not only us, but the city can be proud of. There's a lot of elements here, publicly and privately, and I'm sure Alan, the main architect on the project, will go over those and other consultants. But truly, we've gathered a good team of designers and consultants to do this project, and I'm proud of what they've done. And I hope that we are able to give the city, not only the city of Milwaukee, but all the residents. We've done other projects in other parts of city with the same group, with Jones Architect, R&H as our general contractor, Dowell, and the rest. I won't name all of them, but we are proud of this, and I hope that we get to build it. And having said that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Alan Jones from Jones Architect, the lead on this project. Alan, it's yours.
Thanks, Fareed. Hi, everyone. Alan Jones with Jones Architecture, 120 Northwest 9th Avenue in Portland. As Fareed said, I was thinking about this project today, and it has been almost 5 years. And we're super proud of the work that we've done that we're going to run through with you. We've been in a very close collaboration with the city of Milwaukee. I'm going to run through a little timeline here that shows all of the public engagement and the process that we've been through. But as Brett asked us, I'm going to keep this presentation very short and succinct. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the building necessarily. We've met with the DLC a couple of times, and both times we've met with them, we have received unanimous support and approval from the DLC. So I'll touch briefly on the building, and I'll touch briefly on the landscape components and the habitat restoration, the wetland mitigation. And we have Dowell Engineering with us, Lingo Hansen, Landscape Architecture, Pacific Habitat to talk about habitat restoration. I'm going to do a high-level bullet point on each of those items, but we're purposely keeping this short. It's not because we don't want to talk about this. I've been talking about this project for 5 years. I'd love to talk about it more, but we're hoping that this presentation is really more question and answer than it is me just presenting slides to you. So I want to get through this quickly and then open it up to questions where the experts on the team can answer your questions. So I'll start out with a timeline. As Fareed mentioned, this team was selected in 2017, and it is nearly 5 years ago, as Fareed mentioned. And we believe that the reason that the city of Milwaukie chose this team was because we have a track record of working together, doing developments very much like this, urban infill projects in downtown settings with a complex context. And this context is very, very complex. It's a small town. It's a large urban building in a small town that fronts, a Main Street, Washington, a highway, along a park, along an unimproved right of way, overlooking the river, adjacent to a creek. So this is a very complex project. We've engaged with the city of Milwaukie. A lot of the solutions that we're going to show you today came directly from, suggestions from the city of Milwaukie staff, engineering, thoughts about the floodplain, the cut. All of these were solutions that we came up with jointly with the city of Milwaukee's engineering team. So the team was selected in 2017. We worked actually for, I think, a year and a half. In 2019, came up with a schematic design. Very soon after that, we started our public engagement. We met with the DLC. We held open houses. We met with the neighborhood association twice. We went before city council and the mayor, received overwhelming positive support for the project. The land use submittal went in January of this year. We've been working very closely with Brett and his team. We were deemed complete in July, met with the DLC again recently this month, received their support on the building, and then we're here before you today to show you the culmination of 4.5 to 5 years worth of work. So the rendering here shows the building. You can't see the creek and the park that we were just talking about, but we'll get to that. But I'm just going to speak very briefly about the meeting, because I'm sure that the work that the DLC did and their approval means a lot to you, but I'll just touch on the character of the architecture. So it is a 6-story building, and I'll get to the reasons why it's a 6-story building in a few minutes. But it's a classic building, traditional in form and style as it meets Main Street and Washington Street. And then the nature of the architecture changes as it opens up to the park and the creek and McLaughlin. You can see on the top of the building, we have solar arrays. We've been working very closely with the city of Milwaukie to meet the green building standards that I'll talk about in a few slides. But overall, just a very nice, pedestrian-friendly, classic, traditional building on the street sides, and then it opens up and becomes a modern building as it opens up to the creek and the park. Go ahead, Ryan. At a high level, the project includes the building, which I just spoke about, and I'll tell you the details of the building on the next slide. But it's a mixed-use building with apartments, retail spaces, restaurant spaces. It includes improvements on the Adams Street right-of-way, which is a non-vehicular right-of-way that really is turning into a public plaza for the community to use. It opens up to Dogwood Park. So we're doing modifications and habitat restoration to Dogwood Park. We've been asked by the city of Milwaukie to include a pedestrian path that links from the Adams Street right-of-way, flanks the building, as well as consider future bike paths. There's parking underneath the building, which I'll talk to in the next couple of slides. Maybe most importantly, it's an urban building that is close to public transportation, it's close to light rail, bus lines. Really fantastic location for a mixed-use development that is adjacent to the park, which we'll talk about. Go ahead, Ryan. So a couple of facts about the building. There's 185,000 square feet of building. That is technically the floor area ratio. That does not include portions of the basement that are that are being deemed basement. So there's a little additional area in addition to the 185,000. There's 195 apartment units. A portion of those are affordable units that I'll talk about in a few slides. There's 81 subterranean parking stalls and 236 bike stalls. As I mentioned, the bike path and the pedestrian path, the public improvements, and the restoration of Dogwood Park are all part of the project. Again, a rendering, the same rendering that you looked at in a few slides. So this shows Main Street on the left, Washington on the right. I think it's important to recognize Main Street as, you know, as the farmer's market street with the tabletop that the city of Milwaukie has been working on at the Adams Street right away. So building's really heart and center to downtown Milwaukie, what we consider a gateway building in a lot of aspects. I won't speak at length about the architecture. Go back one slide, Ryan, please. But the building has been, we've been very careful to break down the scale of the building. So the building has been broken down into narrow bays. You can see like faint lines between, you know, there's 3 white brick bays on the left, or 2 on the left and 3 on the right, and then a charcoal brick section in the center, a classic cornice line, and then the penthouse architectural kind of articulation that rises above that cornice line for the 6th story and the 5th in the center. Brett mentioned a variance for the building not meeting the Main Street facade. So what we've done is we've pushed back portions of the Main Street facade in order to create a more rich pedestrian realm on the ground story. So the ground story is just set back slightly in order to provide kind of nicer storefronts and a nicer pedestrian realm. We think it meets the intent of the zoning code in that regard. Go ahead, Ryan. The building's broken down nicely into several different languages with the brick language, with the white brick on the left and the charcoal brick. It steps down the hill, and you can see the penthouse language that is on the 5th and 6th story rising above that is set back. It's a little looser and a more modern language on top. That language turns the corner and flanks McLaughlin and along the park. So the building kind of changes character from a more urban building on the street frontages to a little bit more modern and contemporary or playful building as it opens up to the park and the views. A slide that Brett showed you earlier, which I think was a significant turning point in the design and development of the project. When we initially met with DLC, we came in with a 5-story building that's shown on the top left, which I would characterize as kind of a full donut or a courtyard building where 5 stories wrap all the way around a courtyard. The DLC, I think, gave very astute and very great comments and feedback to us that we considered. And their suggestion was that, make the building respond more to the site. And there's, a building character on Main Street and Washington, but the nature of the site and the contextual influences change as the building opens up to the river, McLaughlin, the park. And they said, consider keeping the same general area of the building, but would you consider proposing a height variance by adding a 6th story, by taking away, carving into the building on the 5th and the 4th stories in order to provide views and to step the building down as it moves towards the river. We took the comments to heart and, felt secure in their advice that it was a good direction. So we moved forward with the design of adding a 6th story, changing the character of the architecture and stepping it back from the street, creating a penthouse language to mitigate the overall height impact of the building. But, at that point, the building changed significantly for the better, in our opinion. And the DLC has continued to support that. City Council supported that decision wholeheartedly when we met with them. As a result, the overall configuration is shown in the lower left, which is a building that steps up from 4 stories to 5 to 6. Go ahead, Ryan. So on the top here is a building section that actually shows the dimensions on the height variance request. So the base zone allows a 45-foot tall building. If a certain portion of the zoning code states that if a certain portion of the building is residential area or greater than 25%, as shown in bullet point 1, and if the development meets the green building certification requirements for the city of Milwaukie, then there is a bonus height area of 24 additional feet that you can add on to the building to arrive at the maximum building height allowed outright if you meet those requirements. So there are a lot of sustainable measures that the building includes. I won't go into all of those, but there's a large solar array on the roof of the building. The solar array is intended to power the common areas of the building. We're looking at optimized energy performance of the building. So we're looking at increasing the exterior walls from 2x6 walls to 2x8 walls to put additional insulation in the building. The windows are high performance windows to save energy, and sustainable site management features, which we can speak more to later, that relate to stormwater and how the site's being developed. So in addition to the 24 feet, as the DLC recommended, we're seeking an additional 9 feet that allows the 6th story for the building and allows the building to step down, as shown in the rendering in the lower left, which we think is making it, a much better building. We think it fits in much better with the park. It reduces the mass of the building on McLaughlin at the Washington intersection. It's a smaller building that meets the park and puts additional area where it feels appropriate on the urban sides of the building on Main Street. Go ahead, Ryan. So the parking level. So this is the basement level of the building. So you enter the parking garage off of the ramp shown on Washington. There's a ramp that comes down a level. We've used every possible inch of the footprint of the building for parking at this level. We have 81 parking stalls. So we looked at lots of different options that included potentially going up a level with parking, including parking on the ground level of the building. I think the feedback that we received both from the city and from the developer and that it took too big of a bite out of the ground story, and it wasn't doing the ground story. Then we weren't able to really meet the intent of downtown development with having parking on the Main Street level. So what we came up with is a full story below ground. We looked at potentially going down an additional level below this, but there are floodplain implications for that. So one of the moving targets that we've experienced on this project from the beginning is that the building was initially designed within the first couple of years to meet the 100-year flood line, as we discussed. When a new city engineer came on board and through subsequent conversations, it was decided that the building needed to comply with the 1996 year flood line, which is, I believe, a foot higher than the 100-year floodplain. So that is the level that the basement's been designed to. So the basement level of the building is above the 1996 flood line, which is above the 100-year floodplain. So there is a potential for the basement level to flood in this project, but it would have to surpass the worst known flood year that has ever been documented for the site. And I'll get to the floodplain mitigation measures soon. Not only has the we're working with FEMA to change the flood elevation, but the basement is above it. However, we've also considered parking stackers, automated parking for the basement level. But what we concluded, and I think that one thing that was noted in Brett's conversation that there was a comment on from an engineer is that you have to keep electrical equipment above a certain line in the basement. So introducing stackers in the basement is really not a viable solution when you're dealing with a basement that could potentially flood. So we've worked on buildings in the South Waterfront, and in that case, like all the electrical gear, all the equipment is required to be above a certain line. So introducing electrical stackers here feels problematic to us. So that's why we have avoided that direction for this project. I won't go into detail on the transportation demand program that Brett referenced, but what we're anticipating tonight, hopefully if we get to this point, is that there'll be a condition of approval that's written that the developer and subsequent owners of the project will need to maintain a transportation demand management program, that the nuances of it still need to be hammered out. But in general, there's been a pretty detailed document shared with the city that proposes certain measures that include what Brett mentions in terms of car-free living, financial incentives for tenants, financial incentives for public improvement, and I think it's really worth touching on again the public transportation options for this building, including light rail and bus lines that are close by, and then regulations, so monitoring the parking plan moving forward, I think could be part of the condition of approval. Ample bike parking has been provided, and then really the extent of the lengths that we went to include public improvements and pedestrian movement and bike connectivity around the site need to be considered. Go ahead, Ryan. So here's the ground level of the building, and I'll keep moving quickly, but really doing, active spaces. So the orange spaces are retail spaces or restaurant spaces that open up to Main Street. As part of the feedback that came from both the city and the neighborhoods, we were really encouraged to do as much active space in the ground story of the building as possible, including a potential restaurant space that opens up towards the Adam Street right away. So that would be a public plaza that a restaurant space could help activate by spilling onto with some tables and chairs. But it's the Adam Street right away is really intended to be a public space that the private development here would help activate. We're showing residential units wrapping around the McLaughlin side and the Washington side, and then the heart of the building being storage and fitness. The fitness area includes shower facilities that the city could take advantage of with there's a parking share program where a number of the parking spaces in the basement would be shared spaces that could take the changing rooms, showers that still need to be developed on the ground story could utilize. Also, I think important to note on this level is there's a public entrance off of Washington and an elevator off of Washington that is specifically designed for the public to use. So the lower level of the building is not just for tenants of this building. There is a public entrance for the shared parking level of the building. So the general public could use that entrance, or people that have parking passes could use that elevator and lobby and get down to the lower level. Go ahead, Ryan. I won't go in a lot of detail about the residential levels of the building, but I think the important thing is that we've really taken to heart when we started this project, the city of Milwaukie had very specific goals about the type of units that were appropriate. Namely like larger family units. There are 2-bedroom units and 3-bedroom units in this building. We work on a lot of multifamily buildings. They typically never include 3-bedroom units. So the 3-bedroom units are unique. There are a number of 2-bedroom units. And then part of the agreement with the city of Milwaukie is that a certain percentage of, I believe it's bedrooms. So I believe there are 23 bedrooms that are required to be affordable units. And in this case, it actually translates into units. We're still working out the balance of how many of those will be 1-bedroom units versus 2-bedroom units, but we are meeting the 10% goal that was outlined initially in the RFP for affordable housing units within the building. This also shows the courtyard of the building as a stormwater facility that I think Kurt Lango can explain in a little bit more detail. Go ahead, Ryan. So then I'm going to leave off and hand this over to Kurt to explain some of the landscape, but a rendering that we're really excited about is the intersection of McLaughlin and Washington, showing the building, as a gateway building that we think would, we're really very excited and proud of it. We think it'll be an amazing gateway to the city of Milwaukie. So go ahead, Ryan. Oh, another rendering of the back of the building that Brett showed earlier, the building stepping down, the public, the walkway, and then the creek and the mitigation that we can speak to, I think, in more questions rather than kind of going into detail about it. But the next slide, I think, might answer some of the questions that came up during your questions for Brett. The slide on the left is the existing floodplain. So the area in green with the red line around it is the boundary. And the area on the right would be using the 1996 floodplain elevation, or elevation 38. So what was proposed, and it was actually proposed by the city of Milwaukie, engineer at the time, who's is no longer part of the city or part of the project, but came up with an idea of using cut in the right of way and cut adjacent to the pathway to help mitigate and move the floodplain off of the site and onto portions of the Adams Street right of way and Dogwood Park, with the idea of improving both the right-of-way and Dogwood Park with habitat restoration. So this shows both the previous floodplain and then the new floodplain. Excuse me. I think with that, the next slide goes into a little bit more detail about the mitigation measures that Kurt Lango will explain, and we have Doll Engineering that can jump in and fill in, as well as Pacific Habitat, but maybe their input's better left to questions. So Kurt, will you?
Yeah, and I'll be brief. This is Kurt Lango with Lango Hansen Landscape Architects, 1100 Northwest Gleason, Portland. And maybe if you could shift to the next slide, because I think there's some better graphics that begin to explain mitigation and impact areas. Just as a high level, I did want to mention that we were involved in the Dogwood Park master planning effort several years ago, and it was important for us as we began to look at these additional mitigation areas to protect that kind of green open space that you have. Really, the two different portions of Dogwood Park, that green space. In addition, to create more of a plaza element at the terminus of Adams Street, which you kind of see in that orange color. And then right adjacent to that, the potential for a restaurant, outdoor seating. And then I think, as mentioned before, the importance of that pedestrian connection connecting Main Street to McLaughlin Boulevard. Next slide. So this begins, I guess when it kind of refreshes, begins to just identify some of those mitigation areas that we've talked about before. And again, Pacific Habitat is here to answer any additional questions. On the left-hand side, you begin to get a flavor of the native habitat that will be replanting these areas. Both this A and B, both are kind of suited to how wet those environments will be. And then the next next slide, as we kind of move further down, it gives you an idea of some of the areas that we'll be replanting kind of within that kind of existing woodland with the removal of native species. So definitely improving, I think, the habitat value all along the creek. If you go to the next slide. So just kind of focusing in just very briefly about some of the materials, both the pathway, we're looking at a higher level material for that Adams Street kind of plaza in terms of a paver, perhaps a porous paver. Certainly we'll have furnishings such as bike racks and then additional planting. Next slide. We're really excited about what is going to happen within that courtyard within the center of the building. We'll be capturing all the roof water and draining into that area to create a dynamic water element that will also filter the water through the kind of larger stormwater basin. And then there are a number of roof terrace or decks that kind of march up the building where there will be key amenity spaces for the tenants that include fire pits, furnishings, barbecue areas as well. Next slide. And then this just gets to a little bit of the planting that we'll be planting up there as well. Next slide. And I think that gives you just a very brief summary. And again, we can answer any questions that you might have about the site or planting. I think, you know, speaking of the design team, I think we're all very excited about this project at a very prominent location.
Thanks, Kurt. Brett, I think that wraps up what we wanted to present. So we turn it over to questions or conversation.
Are there any questions, any clarifying questions from the commissioners for the applicant? And by the way, this is Vice Chair Edge. We seem to have lost our chair during the last couple of minutes, so I'll be facilitating until she returns. Commissioner Sherman.
Thank you, Vice Chair Edge. Really want to thank the applicant team on this. I think this is in many ways a really exciting project. Also really for a wide variety of reasons, both I think on some of the environmental benefits, kind of the opportunity kind of on the site as you've kind of shared. So just wanted to kind of open with that. I think one of the things that I kind of wanted to follow up on was around some of the work at Dogwood Park. And so, Kurt, this might be best suited towards you, but I know that you just kind of mentioned the Dogwood Park master planning process. And I was just wondering how some of these designs align with that or might differ from that, just kind of based on some of what's proposed here.
Sure. Good question. This plan that you're seeing right now does not show the Dogwood Park improvements. I think what we did as part of that planning process was really concentrate on top of bank improvements within the existing grass area. So it included paths, potential nature play area, opportunity for an overlook, perhaps a temporary stage. So very low level passive improvements. So in terms of what we're doing and how it may complement, certainly I think what we were thinking is that the terminus at Adams Street, that plaza element, the addition of a restaurant or retail would really create a lot of synergy between our development and Dogwood Park. So when we were thinking about those things, we thought about it all at once. Nothing that we're doing here would preclude any of those improvements from happening. I think in some ways it would actually enhance it because we will be removing a lot of the nuisance species along that area and replanting.
And just as a follow-up question, in terms of kind of, and maybe whoever's manning the or running the slide deck could go to that last slide. Was there any kind of public conversation as part of the Dogwood Park master planning around this retaining wall that we see in pretty wide scale here?
I'll maybe just speak to the Dogwood Park process. This process happened independent and after that process. So that part was not involved. But again, I think what we tried to do was to stay kind of creek side so that we wouldn't impact in any of those improvements that we were considering for Dogwood Park.
Great.
And if I could just comment on this rendering, this rendering was done by our office that, in all honesty, like we probably put more energy into making the building look good than we did working on the landscaping. So, the nature of Dogwood Park, I don't think is rendered to the extent of what the final design would be. And regarding the height of the retaining walls, this is a depiction, and I think that it's probably going to evolve from here and become, much less prominent, the wall in nature, I think, as it's developed.
Okay, thanks. Just another question about kind of another component of the application around the transportation demand management plan. I would notice kind of in the submittal, it talked about financial incentives for a variety of different options, such as TriMet or ride hail or scooters. And I was curious if what those financial incentives mean. It could mean $50 off your bus pass, or it could mean a free annual bus pass. There's I guess a big range between those things. And so, has there been any definition around what those financial incentives are?
If I may address that, this is Fareed from BlackRock. We have looked at different ways of incentivizing our future tenants regarding having a car-free development. And to be honest with you, all of those options are on the table, and perhaps maybe even a combination of those. Now, the reason we came up with those financial incentives, we just didn't pull it out of our own hat. Those are actually being implemented at some other locations, not necessarily mine. These are other developers, and they work. So we're going to use hopefully a combination of maybe, give them $50, $75, $100 off the rent if they don't have a car. Maybe provide them with if they work downtown Portland, and we can give them a free pass for the year to go use the light rail. I mean, the fact that we are so close to the light rail, I think, is a huge advantage here. Car sharing. Nowadays, you can do the car sharing. The scooters are really popular among young people. And, we have a number of studios in this development, and those studios are usually rented by young professionals who, they ride their bikes all the time, they use their scooter all the time, they use light rail all the time. So can I say that we have hammered it down to exact specific? No, but we have all those options on the table. And we are not afraid to use combinations here. But whatever it works, as long as we can manage that transportation demand.
And what I could add to that is I think that Brett wrote some very careful language in that proposed condition of approval that would leave it open to the specifics of that being worked out with staff and then maintained in the future. So I think Brett's intention was to purposely to leave that open to be worked out. And maybe Brett could comment about that, or we could look at that language. But I think Brett was strategic in the wording that he put together there.
Brett, you might be on mute.
Yeah, I think the thinking about that, the language of that proposed condition was to essentially, I guess, try to capture at least the elements that were proposed in the TDM provided by the applicant, and allow for some flexibility in working with the applicant to kind of come up with a workable program. I mean, I think that it's something that I think we wanted to be careful about not trying to nail things down too much, because part of, I think, how a TDM probably needs to work to be successful is it needs to be adaptive and responsive. And there's with 195 units, that's a lot of different people in different situations that, any one of them, I guess their situation or conditions might change over the course of their tenancy. Plus, if you have tenants coming and going, some of them may be more appealed to by one option than another. So I think there's a recognition that there probably needs to be some ability for the applicant to make adjustments over time to the TDM, and also noting the importance though of there being some accountability of trying to set some benchmarks and things so that we can come up with a workable way to monitor and adjust and adapt based on what's happening with the building.
Commissioner Sherman, do you have any other thoughts you want to share, or questions rather?
Yeah. And so I guess maybe, Brett, this is a question for you or for other city staff. Do we have other kind of hard TDM plan requirements that we are all involved as a city in kind of tracking kind of the performance on, and having those conversations around, are the targets being met, and what is happening to kind of change if those targets aren't being met by a private developer?
Well, should we save questions for staff until later, just as a matter of procedure?
That's probably most appropriate.
So, Commissioner Kosh-Rabadi, you've been patient.
Thank you, Chair Roosevelt. Appreciate it. I actually also want to thank the applicant as well for the presentation, and I can just tell that this is something you guys spent a lot of time on, not just by the years that you've put into it, but you can tell by the design that there's a lot of thought into it, and I think that's the difference between a developer who has spent so much of his time here in our city. That planning comes from that true care for our community. So I do appreciate a lot of the thought and the ideas and the flexibility and working with the city on this. I just wanted to say that first. Two questions that I have. One of them, the height variance. I don't know if this was mentioned. I'm pretty sure it was. But does the height variance, does it increase the number of units, or no? Does it keep it the same? Has it always been 195?
The unit counts actually went down over time since we started this project. So when Fareed initially, when we started working on this and Fareed put together his pro forma in the beginning of the project, the criteria was that we were going to need to get to 200 units in order to make this work. And over time, we slowly learned how difficult the site was. We learned about the floodplain, and we learned about the soil conditions, and then we came to understand the reality of the affordable unit count. So the unit count actually dropped from over 200 down to 175-ish, or 170 market rate units. So to answer your question more directly, though, the area is very similar. directly taking area off the 4th story and the 5th story and put it up on the 6th story. So it's been a net reduction of units and approximately equal trade for area.
If I may add to that, Alan, thank you, Commissioner, for what you said. I've been in the city of Milwaukie, like I said earlier, since mid-1990s. The current building I'm in used to be a cigar shop. So I renovated that building and moved my dental practice in there. And I'm not leaving the city of Milwaukie. I'm just moving my office from where it is located now. We're going to move to Milwaukie Marketplace. And, I'm going to still be practicing over there a couple of times a week. But to answer your question or to expand on what Alan said, our footage hasn't really changed much. And yes, we had more units and we needed to drop the units because we felt like for us to be able to provide something for the city and also for future tenants, we needed more 2 bedrooms and we needed some 3 bedrooms apartments. Like Alan said earlier, usually when you get to this kind of scale development, you don't see any 3 bedroom apartments. You do if you're in the suburbs with the garden style development, you see some 3 bedroom apartments. But we felt like we needed to add some 3 bedroom because I remember having the conversation with the mayor and also the city council, and they were saying, so you don't have anything for a young couple with 1 or 2 kids. What are they going to do? They're all going to fit in a 1 bedroom or a 2 bedroom. So we decided that add some 3 bedroom units, which reduced the number of units from over 200 to 195. I hope that explains
Yes.
what you were asking.
Thank you. Yes, it does. Absolutely. I really appreciate that. The second question is, one of the comments that came in was from the North Clackamas Watershed Council, and it had to do with working with your development team during this process for consultation with the Fisheries and Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, request for close consultation and participation in Kellogg Channel design from Coho Point, and realize opportunity for urban stream restoration. I just want to know if is that something that you guys plan on doing, is working with the North Clackamas Watershed on those points?
I have to refer that to Kurt, I think.
Kurt or Pacific Habitat maybe speak to that. Honestly, that hasn't been on our radar, but if that feels like something that's appropriate to do for this project, I don't know why we wouldn't. It just it hasn't come up as part of our work, but I know that Pacific Habitat has been very careful and diligent about habitat restoration and making sure we're doing the right thing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit. This is Michael C. with Pacific Habitat. Our address is 9450 Southwest Commerce Circle, Suite 180, Wilsonville, Oregon, 97070. So there's no in-water work associated with this project. No filling or dredging within the lake itself. So any kind of aquatic habitat, restoration, things like that, that is not within the scope of this project. Certainly we could partner with other partners and there's opportunities there, but that's specifically excluded from this proposal.
Yeah, and I think, thanks, Mike. I just want to state though that if there's some organization out there that wants to talk to us about this project, that we're all ears.
Thank you. And I think a lot of it has to do with some any future developments that have to do with Kellogg, especially like with the dam and those kind of things. But thank you. I appreciate it. And that answered my question.
Okay, commissioners, I'm seeing no additional hands raised.
Can I provide one clarifying comment just from some of the questions that were asked earlier?
Yeah, I'm sorry, who's speaking?
Sorry, this is Corey Derrick with Dowell, 720 Southwest Washington Street, Suite 750, Portland, Oregon, 97206. So on the floodplain, just wanted to clarify a couple items. One of the questions that was asked: will Kellogg Creek be narrowed? And the answer to that is, we're not changing the ordinary high water level or touching below that, and we will not be working within or adjusting the floodway either. So technically, the stream will not be narrowed. And then one additional comment to make on that as well with the floodplain is, it'll be activated during lesser flooding events than necessarily just the 100-year. So it actually provides kind of a net benefit to the Kellogg Creek kind of flooding area.
All right, I appreciate that, Corey. I was just reading some additional comments. I have one question of my own, which is relative, and which Corey might make sense for you to stay on with us, is the natural resource area and mitigation. One of the comments we received, or the questions we received, was relative to the nature of the steep cut that's being made. And the retaining wall. Was there any consideration for softening that approach? And maybe this is a question for Kurt as well. Softening the levels of the retaining wall in order to provide additional habitat there, and what considerations have been made in terms of habitat as you designed that edge?
Yeah, well, yeah, thank you. So I think this is a good visual to that wall. Originally, we had a concrete retaining wall, which was 12 to 14 feet high. But I think what we felt was that we needed to make that more habitat friendly, more green, both from looking from McLaughlin into the site, but also as you're standing up on Dogwood Park. So what you see there is a series of stepped gabions, essentially rock-filled wire baskets that step up at certain levels to make up that grade. And what we'll be doing, and what you've seen maybe on other types of projects or along highways, is that we'll be planting grasses and shrubs along the top of each of those treads. So you begin to see the green right here. We actually think it's probably going to be a lot more green. So that, I think, in and of itself is going to provide habitat, forage for different animal life within that bank, much more so than any sort of concrete wall.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm seeing no additional hands raised from the commission, so I think we could probably move on in the agenda, giving them one last chance to do that while I pull up the script here. Again, just want to thank the team for a thorough presentation. Also appreciate brevity when it's necessary so we can continue to move forward. So from there, I think we've handled any clarifying questions the commissioners may have, and we'll move on to support testimony and support of the application. Brett, if you could help me out, I'm looking to see if we have anybody who wishes to speak in support of the application. And if you would, use the raise your hand function in Zoom in order to indicate.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any hands raised for support.
Okay, then we move into opposition. Again, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom if you wish to speak in opposition of the application. I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that.
Okay, seeing no hands raised.
Okay, thank you. And then lastly, please raise your hand if you wish to speak with neutral testimony on the application. I'm not seeing any hands raised on my end.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, because I know we had Gary Klein, wanted to jump in early before we made it clear that, there would be a time for testimony. And Gary, I wanted to just check and make sure in terms of hand raising or some other way to communicate if you wanted to present any comments right now. Otherwise, I guess I'll take the absence as you being okay with not testifying right now. And then Heather Cook from the North Clackamas Parks and Recs District submitted a comment kind of just before 7 that I was able to share with the planning commissioners. Heather, I don't know if you want to present any testimony kind of to reflect the comment that you provided. Yes. Okay. I'll promote you.
So Heather, again, if you would just present yourself by stating your name and your city of residence before you get started, that would be ideal. And then typically we like to confine comments.
Sure. My name is Heather Cook, and I reside in the city of Portland, and I work for the North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District. And I simply will just very briefly underscore that we defer to some other agencies with natural resource expertise on most of this, but we did just want to let you know that we are interested in being able to review plans going forward and look at the landscape design. We had some input from our natural resources manager about, for example, something at the level of, being careful about planting certain types of species that are prone to inundation. And I think, again, there were a little bit of commentary just regarding the wanting to soften that wall wherever possible, like Kurt mentioned. And I actually trying to think if there's anything else that I wanted to underscore. I guess just that, we again, just want to continue to coordinate with the city, which we've done really well in the past. And we want to continue to work with any plans to review. Certainly if there's a connection, that has to be made to the park when a plaza is developed, we want to be really mindful about how that intersection happens with the park as well, since the right-of-way, the Adams Street right-of-way that's being developed is probably what people think of as park today. So there's some probably perception that there's park being lost, but I think it's really about how we integrate this new public space with the existing park. So thank you very much for allowing me to chime in.
Thank you, Heather. We did receive your comments. We received them late today, so I appreciate that. Last opportunity then, if you've seen anybody and I don't, just in those who want to present neutral testimony.
Madam Commissioner, may I just expand on that Gabion wall if I have a minute? Or is that not necessary at this point?
Let's see here. Brett, is it acceptable? I think technically we go into rebuttal at this point, so
okay, no problem. That's what I was asking before I say anything.
Wait, just 1 second then. So seeing that Gary is not responding and likely we're having no other testimony, then we'll just move into rebuttal. So this would be your opportunity. So does staff have any additional comments in response to the applicant presentation or public testimony?
I had wanted to make sure that I shared the comment that we'd gotten from Heather. So we did that, crossed that off. And then there had been a question asked earlier about the, I think it was Commissioner Sherman who asked about the TDM program and how we were going to work with that. And I think what I would say is, I think the primary other TDM that we've had an opportunity to work on is with Milwaukie High School, and we're still kind of in the process of working with them to manage their TDM. So this will be the first chance to work on a TDM program for downtown. And I think our feeling is that the way we tried to word the condition was, again, as I mentioned before, to give us some flexibility and to recognize that it would probably be a bit of an iterative process. So I'm not sure, Commissioner Sherman, if that answers or gets at part of what you were hoping to talk about with that aspect.
I think that's sufficient for now. Thanks, Brett. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay, with that, Brett, then we move on to, this is your opportunity, Fareed. Does the applicant have any rebuttal or additional comments that you'd like to make in general to the public testimony that was provided?
If I may, it's not really a rebuttal, it's just a little comment. You know, we'd be more than happy to work with Clackamas County in order to implement what they have to say. I think we can reach out to them and get that ball rolling. And as far as the retaining wall, you know, I've done these things before in the past, and I think the rendering doesn't really do justice. It's a step down wall, and I don't know if it's worth it, but I promise you, by it's 2-3 years with this weather we have in Oregon, you will not be able to see that wall because it'll be just covered with vegetations and bushes and trees and what have you. So, you know, that is something the depth is not shown in the rendering, and everybody's looking at it, I think, from the comments I've heard, that it is one huge 14-foot retaining wall that we're going to be staring at it for the next 30 years. I don't think that's the case. I think within the next couple of years, that wall will totally disappear in vegetations and growth. So, and that's one of the reasons it's costing us a lot more to go to this type of a retaining wall versus the straight wall. But the reason we switched there because of that same fact that I believe in a few years, that wall would be totally covered and nobody will ever see it again. Just that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, then I'm seeing a hand raised. Brett from Jennifer.
Yeah, well, Jennifer's on the engineering staff. So I don't know if we missed the chance to kind of call it. I didn't check to see if any of the other staff who are supporting us here tonight wanted to say anything. So
I think the city attorney would have flagged me, but let's go ahead, Jennifer.
Thank you. I just wanted to make one comment that there's a lot of coordination with the project team on these cut and fills in a way that will allow us to facilitate the future undercrossing of 99E when the dam is removed. So that's my only comment.
Appreciate that. I think you all are hearing the message that there's a lot of interest in how that is being developed and how it's further being designed in coordination with a number of things, the dam removal, et cetera. So I hope you're hearing that message and continue to refine and work through that. I think at this point, it makes sense. We're going to close public testimony. The public testimony portion of this hearing on DR-2021-001 Coho Point redevelopment is now closed. Gavel in parentheses, moving forward. So this is the opportunity then, and as we say goodbye to the team presenting for the commission to discuss. And the question is, commission, are you ready for discussion? Yes, you are. So let's have it. Who would like to get started? Joseph's hand is already raised. So Commissioner Edge.
Thank you. This is a really exciting application. It's really great to, there's been a lot of effort that the city has put into this. And, it's really great to see, this move forward to this phase of review. And I appreciate the effort that the applicant team and the city staff and even the city leadership, this was, engaged with by the DLC and the city council. Appreciate all the effort that everyone put into shaping this proposal into what it is. And I've read the findings and proposed conditions of approval extensively, and am satisfied that everything here is supported by the evidence in the record. And so I would be happy to vote to move this forward today. And I'm really excited about this, and it does a very good job of addressing, all of the criteria. It's exciting to see, our new comprehensive plan being part of the criteria that this is reviewed against. And I think they've done a very good job of balancing a very complex site and a very complex permitting process and review process into something that, again, hopefully the city can be proud of. I think it does a really good job of addressing the criteria, the standards, and the downtown design review guidelines. And so I'd be happy to go through the findings in greater detail if the commissioners want to talk about this in greater detail or have any other questions about, what's in here. But I'm really happy with what's been put in front of us tonight, and I'm happy to support this.
Thank you, Commissioner Edge. Is there anyone else?
Chair Roosevelt, may I ask Commissioner Edge a question?
Yes.
Is that with Brett's revised suggestions?
I had a similar question.
Yes, this would be with the revised finding and the revised condition of approval to address the fact that the TDM needs to carry forward with future ownership.
I think, let's, Commissioner Edge, if you just going to cue that language up for here shortly. Are there any other commissioners who would like to make comment? Oh, Commissioner Kosh-Robati.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo some of the things Commissioner Edge said, and again, just say thank you to the applicant because I think this obviously was very well thought out. And the part that got me excited was the affordable housing part of it, and it's just over 10%. Hopefully, there's room for more. But I think this was done with some care and a lot of thought, and I just I can't reiterate that enough. I just want to also say that this is the difference when a city works together with developers, especially ones that want to see good things done and ones that want to take into account what the community needs. So hopefully there's a lot of other developers looking to do the same thing here.
Thank you, Adam. Other commissioners? Commissioner Hemer?
So I will not be voting for this project tonight. And it has nothing to do with the public-private partnership, the design of the building, or anything like that. But I think that we have gotten too loose as a planning commissioner to give variances for things when we set a standard and rules put together. The parking standard that we put together, the 25% reduction and the 5% reduction for that, was so that we didn't have people coming back for variances when they went downtown. And now what we are doing is why even have a standard if we're just going to blow it off anyways? So I will not vote for this building unless if the required amount of parking is in that building with the deductions that were already written in, so that we didn't have to come back and people having variances. I think what we're doing in the long run is a disservice to the folks that try to shop and try to live in downtown Milwaukee, because even though that we have this, I want everybody to understand how ridiculous this idea about a shared parking is. If you build a building, right, next to a transit, and just assume that everybody there has a car, but they don't want to go drive to work because they're there close to transit. Well, where do all those cars sit? In that parking. So you're going to get very little movement of cars in and out of there. And if you do get a lot of movement of cars in and out of there, then obviously your idea of a 25% reduction next to transit is no good. So I'm not going to vote when we already give reductions in the law for the purpose that we don't have to go back to a variance. So I am not willing to give a variance on the parking.
Before I move to Commissioner Sherman, is there anybody who wants to respond or react to Commissioner Hemer specifically?
Maybe just for a moment, I am really glad that we got these kind of this kind of additional finding around the transportation demand management plan. So I really want to thank staff for sending that out. That was, as I was prepping, that was one of the first things that I kind of had, I was going to bring up as kind of a suggestion. And I think Commissioner Hemer, I don't know if you could find that plan could go far enough to help alleviate some of those demands. But I would hope that you might be willing to kind of consider that, as well as, also considering, I think as staff rightfully pointed out in the documents, there's other tools that the city has in terms of parking permits and those kinds of things. So Chair Losfeld, to kind of answer your question, I think that would be a little bit of maybe sharing some thoughts back with Commissioner Hemer.
If I may, Chair, rebut just real quick. I actually like the fact that this TDM is adaptable and adjustable, and it's built in with incentives, because those things actually work. But we don't even know what the plan is. They don't even know what the plan is. You got some weird sort of promises, and I bet you it's probably against the rules not to rent or sell a place because you have a vehicle. It's probably discriminatory. So I want everybody, I am not willing to give that variance when we've already built in variance structures to it. Just like we gave a 6 and 7 story height, or we gave extra bonus height because of the green, right? We did that to stop these variances from coming, and that was a constant. That was the same thing that we did before. So I am not willing to push the envelope beyond what we have already granted with the variances. So.
Okay, Commissioner Kashrabadi?
Yes, Chair, thank you. I can respect that from Commissioner Hemer, because in the beginning, when at the first look at this, I was thinking the same thing. That 81 parking spots seemed pretty low, pretty limited for 195 units. What changed my mind though was the TMD, and the fact that I started really looking at, okay, it's not really that you're not renting somebody who has a car, because you do have 81 spaces available for those who do have cars, but you're trying to promote for those that prefer not to use that type of transportation, which is understandable. So I think, not saying that you don't bring up a good point, Commissioner Hemer brings up an excellent point, because again, that was my first first thought when I saw it as well. But I just got more comfortable with being able to, even though they don't have a plan, I mean, they have some time to really get that plan together, because the building's not going up tomorrow either. It's going to take some time for that to have to happen. So I think with the continued work with city staff, as Commissioner Sherman mentioned, I do think that there will be I don't think it will be as bad as we might think, but I do respect that comment, and I do understand the concern.
Thank you. Commissioner Sherman?
Yeah, Commissioner Hemer, I'm glad that you brought up the point around how the plan wasn't really defined. And, that was kind of one of the questions that I had for the applicant in terms of, what does financial incentives need? And some of this is just, maybe having the luxury of working in the transportation sector myself and being able to know, Milwaukie, we don't have a bike share program. We don't have a scooter program. We don't have Zipcar here. We do have TriMet, and we have TriMet a block away. But, a TriMet annual pass costs $1,100 a year. And so in terms of those financial incentives, how much are they going to kind of close that gap? Is it going to be a free pass if you say you don't have a car for a year, or is it going to be you still have to pay half of it, or something like that? I think I also kind of struggle with the lack of definition there. And also, I guess maybe to that point, would hope that in some of the flexibility that staff is building into this, that we would, from an implementation perspective, make sure we have some strong protections there and some teeth, so that we can make sure we're making progress on those goals.
Commissioner Edge?
Thank you. So yeah, also, I know we've talked about this a lot, and and I respect Commissioner Hemer's opinions on this. The issue with the parking, and in this case the variance. I appreciate not wanting to over-vary applications. I think that I've had similar complaints in the past. About other projects downtown that I felt like were very arbitrary variances. But the truth is that we provide this review process and provide a legal means for applicants to accomplish these things. And I don't want to penalize applicants for following a process and doing what jumping. I don't want to move the goalposts. You know what I mean? We provide a plan and a process and a review procedure, and if they go through that, then it may be discretionary, but they follow the rules, and we've allowed them the situation and regulatory framework for them to get an approval such as that. So I don't want to penalize the applicants for following our processes to try to get their approvals, especially in a case where they're deliberately trying to work with the city to enact city policy, and so I feel that ultimately when we're looking at the criteria in front of us for the permit reviews that are before us, that they are meeting the threshold to comply with the requirements, the criteria for the various reviews underway. And so while I appreciate that, and I would like to see proposals come through that are consistent with the standards, so that we aren't trying to gauge whether something actually does a better job of meeting the policy than what the letter of the code is. But I don't think that's the applicant's fault, and I'm not tempted to vote to deny a permit that they've met addressed all the criteria for, in my estimation.
And if I may, Chair, just rebut, Commissioner Edge, I understand your point, but don't forget a variance is asking us for a favor because they don't feel that they can meet the standard for whatever reason. I am not willing, once we have already lowered the standard in the rules, we have lowered the standard in the rules. Now they are coming back and asking for more. I am not willing, once we have lowered the standards, right, for a particular building that's close enough to transit and puts in a bunch of bicycle parking, which was what they were using for their variance methods before. Now they are just simply asking to lower standards. I think that sets a bad precedent. I think that it's going to actually hurt in the long run, because now our plaza is going to be mostly filled with vehicles and we won't be able to use it as public space. It's my biggest fear. So I'm just not willing to go beyond a variance for once they've actually obtained rules that we set for them so that they didn't have to come for a variance. And you're right, it is their prerogative to ask. Doesn't mean we have to grant.
Other commissioners with comment on any aspect of this applicable criteria? If no commissioners are interested in having further discussion, then I will look for a motion.
Do we need to read the revised condition and finding into the record, or is it sufficient to refer to the revised finding and condition that Brett emailed us earlier?
I have the same question, Brett. You mentioned that. I was hoping Joseph would queue it up, but we recognize that you've provided it. Is it enough to recognize it and refer to it, or do we need to state it?
I'll defer to Justin somewhat. I think my thinking was that since it had been presented to you both via email and also presented in the slide presentation from staff, that I'm happy to show it again if you want to discuss any potential changes to the language. I guess my hope, and Justin, you can tell me what you think, was that you could refer to the language of the condition and the revised findings as referenced by staff or as provided by staff in the staff presentation.
I'm fine with that approach.
I think we've done that before.
Yeah, I'm fine with that approach, Brett. I agree with you. If we want to talk about changes or something like that, that's a different thing. We need to put it up and have deliberations about it. I haven't heard that request yet or an interest in doing so, but I think the way you outlined is perfectly fine.
Okay, if commissioners want to make any changes to that, Commissioner Sherman?
I'd just be maybe curious to hear from other members of the commission if anyone would be interested in talking more about providing more definition around that transportation demand management plan, or leaving it as presented, which certainly leaves, I think, some flexibility for staff to kind of work on this. But this is also that moment where we might be able to provide more definition there.
Brett, would you mind sharing your screen and bringing that back?
I do not mind.
Okay, and in the meantime, Commissioner Hemer, you've raised your hand. And you're on mute. Sorry, you're gonna have to start over. You're on mute.
I lowered my hand and forgot to click the other button. So I would say, as proposed, being as flexible as it is, it's better than us trying to lock something in tonight, because you don't quite know how far the developer is willing to go or how far the city's willing to go. So there's a series of negotiations that probably needs to work out there. And if we regulate it, we may not come up with the best idea. So I would say that this is flexible enough and good enough, as long as it gets followed through with.
Sorry, I was just reading it myself. Commissioner Kasharabadi?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that I agree with Commissioner Hemer on that one. I'm just weary about defining certain things and potentially using that being restrictive. I think this gives enough flexibility, as Commissioner Hemer said, to where the applicant and the city can work that out, or the city can come up with parameters, and it's something that they can discuss between themselves.
I just curious, this is a point of the project which is going to cause, a lot of angst or frustration within the community and within the public. This component of parking and lack of parking. Is there any part of this that should be communicated as it's regularly monitored and it's the responsibility for ongoing implementation, et cetera, that is either communicated either back to the tenants or back to members of downtown Milwaukee, whether it's business owners, et cetera, because this, is reflecting kind of the growing pains of the city, of increasing density that business owners are going to feel, employees are going to feel, certainly homeowners and residential areas on the limits of downtown are going to feel this and are going to be, the ones bearing that burden. So I just wonder if there's a component of this which is going to be somehow communicated back to them in terms of how it's being implemented or changed. Did someone have a hand raised, or does someone?
Well,
yeah.
Chair Losfeld, and I feel like what I'm hearing there is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is not so much part of a condition of approval, but more kind of maybe asking city staff how they plan on sharing out performance with the community. Is that kind of where you were going, or were you thinking that there could also be some responsibility on the developer?
That's what I'm saying, responsibility on the developer. So some aspect of this added criteria, which would require communicating back to either tenants or business owners, et cetera. Could be simply making that report publicly available on the website, sharing it with the city, et cetera.
If I may, Chair, so there are lots of people kind of involved in this police department because they'll get complaints of people parking right for a long time. You probably have Lake Road NDA, Historic Milwaukie NDA, the Downtown Business Association, local businesses, blah, blah. We could try to name all of these partners in here. I think really what happens is that the on-street parking does not become the responsibility of the developer. It becomes the responsibility of the city. And I think they've advertised it that way. All the developer can do is encourage not to have people not to have cars and or to park, well, or to only have enough cars that fit inside their parking lot. So I think going beyond the language that is here will get us a little bit too much into the weeds, and will add a little bit too much detail where we may be missing, the best idea is just my feeling.
Commissioner Sherman?
At risk of violating what Commissioner Hemer just said, what if we were to think about a slightly different version of, I think it's the second sentence, and add on to the end of that sentence, including the establishment of performance benchmarks and a regular monitoring component, which the city shall share publicly at least once per year. How it's shared, where it's shared, I think all of that kinds of things could get figured out. But I think to Commissioner Hemer's point, any of that excess automobile demand is going to be pushed into the public right of way. And in that way, it becomes the city's responsibility. And I think if the city is at least publicly sharing out the performance from the developer on this program, that creates a little bit of an accountability kind of feedback loop, where maybe we can kind of increase performance if things aren't going as well as whoever those community stakeholders feel.
All right. Commissioner Edge?
Well, I think that reporting and publicly publishing, information related to TDM programs that are active in the city is important and is a role of the city. I don't believe that a condition of approval on a single or on a set of applications for one proposal is the right place to apply that. I think that we should forward a recommendation to city council or the city manager to make that data public. I don't believe that the conditions of approval for this review is the right place for that policy to be implemented. But it's a great idea.
Yeah, I guess my question for Laura is, and she may answer this, are there any rules written on this stuff?
No, and I think that the city would be happy to share this information. I mean, that's part of our whole downtown parking management strategy that the city council adopted, and that's something that we're going to be looking at and monitoring and observing and making adjustments through the course of time. And so I think this would be a great thing to take into account when we're reporting out on what we're doing, what the city is managing the parking. So I think we would be more than happy to share the results of this program.
Laura, so do you support the added language onto that second sentence?
I think I'm fine with that. I mean, if that makes folks feel better about it, that it says which the city shall publicly publish each year, I think that's fine.
I certainly feel better about it.
I'm comfortable with it because it's something we would want to do anyway, I think.
Okay.
Can I ask just a point of clarification, and that is just to acknowledge that by incorporating it into a condition of approval, we would be locking that reporting requirement in kind of perpetuity, regardless of performance over time. And I don't know if Justin has any thoughts about that.
Well, and to your point, maybe I stand corrected in saying that I don't know that we want to tie it to a particular development application, but it should behoove the city that we're going to do that regardless of this particular application. So maybe it shouldn't be in the findings, but that we can make a promise to this commission that we will continue to monitor and report back to folks throughout the course of time.
I'd also add that the information, I would agree with Laura on that point. And I'd also add that it's a public record, so anybody can get it at any time. That doesn't necessarily satisfy the discussion here, but there's no incentive here to hide the information. And given that parking, we have a strategy that's been implemented a couple of years ago here in the city. We will continue to require downtown developments to engage in this sort of practice as part of our downtown management. And that's something that I believe planning does an annual report to council anyway. So that could be the source of the publication right there.
Well, and just one point of clarification, Justin, that would be something that the Community Development Department would do as part of their program. But yes, it would be reported back to everybody.
Yes. Sorry to smear that over.
Okay. Commissioner Sherman?
Yeah, thanks. So while I didn't make a friendly amendment, I will retract that. I do think as a matter of kind of public policy, what we've been talking about makes a lot more sense. Maybe a slightly different question for the commission of, with this kind of requirement, if we, to Commissioner Hamer's and Commissioner Edge's points earlier around other applications, like, is this a kind of requirement that we could feel comfortable with thinking about future scenarios where we might also have TDM plans? So maybe this kind of, this vague, not in, I don't mean that in a demeaning way to staff, this flexible language around setting benchmarks and tracking progress. Is this something we'd also feel comfortable about in other settings?
I think that was a thought for reflection. Can you return us then, Brett? Oh, okay, Commissioner Hamer.
If we enter, this is going to technically maybe be our second TDM that we enter into, right? With Milwaukie High School, looks like one's coming up or something like that, and then with this.
If it's not part of the applicable criteria and it's just a further discussion on a theoretical or a hypothetical that Commissioner Sherman's posting, Commissioner Hamer, is that the case?
I wanted to respond to Commissioner Sherman's question where we should write rules. That's it. Not here, but in
yes.
theory.
Not here, but in future conversations with the commission, I think we continue the topic, and that's all. The only point I want to make, and I apologize for cutting you off for doing that, but city attorney would have done it otherwise. So with that in mind, Brett, will you return us to gallery? It's really easy to throw Justin under the bus because he stays on mute fairly often. Oh, okay, Commissioner Edge.
I think I would like to make a motion.
Yes, please.
Oh.
Sure.
Let's see. I move that we approve master file DR-2021-001 with the findings and conditions of approval as shown by staff in the presentation tonight.
It has been so moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand. Aye. All those opposed, please raise your hand or state. And we have one up in opposition. All right. Moving forward, thank you everybody for great discussion. I will read the appeal rights. If anyone wishes to appeal the decision to the City Council, you can complete an application stating the grounds for your appeal within 15 days of mailing of notice of decision. Please see planning staff for greater detail. That moves us to other business. Do commissioners or staff have any other business or updates? Commissioner Hemer?
I'll start with my commercial, but I will end with a compliment. So October 9th, 1 p.m., Cantor the Enchanter, a bubble musician, will be down at the museum. And then following that is a play written by me, myself, and I called They Came Over the Barlow Trail, which will have Henderson Llewellyn, Lot Wickham, and Mary Campbell Llewellyn as interviewees talking about their journey over the Oregon Trail. This is in celebration of 175 years of existence of the Barlow Trail. And check out the Clackamas County Heritage Council site for more events that will be going on during the month of October as we commemorate the trail, including an interview with Governor Barbara Roberts that the Milwaukie Museum did and her celebration of the Barlow Trail as well. I'm going to tell you my compliment. So at the museum, I know I meant to hit the other one. So at the museum, we had a lady come in wanting to look for some pictures of her house because she got a letter from code enforcement saying that her fence was in the right of way and that she didn't have enough vegetation on her lot. Okay. Whether it's right or wrong, it's probably actually true that the code enforcement did this. She was panicked. She was in tears. And of course, those letters say, we'll call the planning department, right? And she said, Brett got back to her and he was so nice and so calming and helped her out so very, very much. And then she called back again and she got Vera, and Vera was so nice and so happy that even though that she's worried that she's going to lose her house, which we all know that isn't the case, the planning staff, look, I admire you guys. Not only do you do a bunch of hard work, right? Reading a bunch of rules all day and following them. I don't know how anybody ever does that. Second of all, you have just people whining and complaining at you that the rules aren't fair. But third of all, you have people in a state of panic who don't know anything that is going on. And you guys, every time we hear an applicant come or every time I hear about the planning staff, you guys give such great customer service. And I just want to say thank you because the residents of Milwaukie are lucky to have our new senior planner and Laura, such a great team that you have gathered together. And we look forward to many more of them coming on board. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to say, yes, thank you so much. Brett and Vera are exemplary with their customer service. I've just watched, observing them and the way they talk to folks is really just, I'm really proud to be a part of their team. And they brought me to their team. So thank you for having me join you. I'm lucky to be with such great people at the city.
Commissioner Hemer, what percentage of the Milwaukie Museum advertising budget do you receive publicly stating that?
No. I receive no money. In fact, I probably pay more than anything else. So appreciate that. I have my banner in the back next to my Pickle Rick. Did you? I
did catch that this time around. Thank you.
Aside from writing the play, are you also playing all three characters?
No, I tell you, I will be starring as Lot Wickham, and if you've never been on any of the downtown tours or seen me as Lot Wickham, it is one heck of a performance. And two other people, which normally one plays Florence Olsen Letting. She is excellent and beautiful at the same time. She happens to be live in the same house with me and is tied together with this. So, but she is excellent as well. And then the other, Henderson, will be played by Milo Denner. With interviewed by Linda Carr. There you go.
So I actually have an update today. In 2 days, I think it is, on the I guess maybe it'll 3 days. The first, Friday the 1st, will be the official release of the Oak Lodge Governance Project report that was sponsored by Metro and performed by Eco Northwest. And I've been involved as a member of the steering committee of that particular effort. And it focuses on the unincorporated area of Clackamas County to the south of Milwaukie, excluding any of Milwaukee's UGMA area, the already urban growth management area of the city. And it looks at 3 different scenarios, including staying unincorporated, annexing to the city of Milwaukie, or starting a new city. And that report, again, is going to be officially released on Friday. So that's my big update in that space.
Congratulations to you. I know that was a big effort. Others? Come on. Craig.
I sent an email earlier to Laura and Vera, but they were both out enjoying the sun or a different coast or a wedding or whatever they were doing. And I want to make sure that the Engage Milwaukie stuff, since it is public information, is included in our packet for for our October 12th meeting. I hopefully that's possible. I don't know what the legal ramifications are.
It is.
But, okay, awesome.
It's already in there. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Greg, you said this meeting was going to go until midnight.
No. October 12th will go to midnight, maybe 1 o'clock.
Okay, Commissioner Sturman?
This was a question for Laura, or maybe more appropriately Vera, who's not here. But you know, I received my postcard talking about October 12th, as I'm sure a lot of other folks did. I'm curious if you've kind of have thought out kind of on a timeline, like when do we have to do the official kind of Measure 56 kind of notification of your, which, you know, is kind of the scarier one. Do you have a sense of that, or is that maybe something that Vera could talk more about at a future hearing?
I think Vera will talk about that at the on the 12th. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna move on. Moving on then to what I think we've talked about, discussion items, future forecast meetings.
Yep. So again, October 12th, we're going to start the public hearing for the Middle Housing Code, and we're going to do that again on the 26th. In between there, the date that you don't see is October 21st, which is actually the joint meeting with the NDAs. And so we'll be we've already sent out a notice a couple months ago, but I'll send out some more information regarding that. And then we've got, again, on the 26th, we've got a variance for a property line adjustment. And that's all we've got coming. We have a lot with the code amendments in the next two hearings, but that's what's on the schedule for now.
What happened to Hillside?
Hillside is not on here. Oh yeah, Hillside. Oh, I'm so sorry. Good catch. Hillside, I believe, is scheduled for the 12th. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, that dropped off. So yes, that's coming your way as well.
1 a.m., 2 a.m. And may I suggest to the chair, when you talk to the planning staff, that maybe we put Hillside before the public discussion, so that we may not have to close that off early to make sure that we get Hillside in.
Yeah, we can do that for sure.
In terms of the special meeting on the 21st, what time is that? I don't think I have that on my calendar.
You know what I'll do is I'll send out a calendar invite to all of you all tomorrow, but I do believe it's 6:30, but I will send it out tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's it. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
It's been moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? All opposed. All right, everybody. See you next time. Thanks so much.
Thanks
Thanks, everyone.